Welcome to another edition of Talking Ball. It's Jack, and today we are looking at the Brooklyn Nets. And I'm going to be doing a few of these as we're a little bit deeper into the offseason for most teams. We're in the NBA Finals right now, but taking a little page out of Bobby Marks's book here and previewing the offseason for several NBA teams. I'm starting with the Brooklyn Nets, of course, here today. I'm going to go through the current roster, what I think they can do in the draft, which is important for a team like the Nets, trade, and then free agent possibilities. It's going to be a little bit of a combination of what I think they will do and what I think they should do. So without further ado, current roster. So you've got a couple of guys. We're not going to touch on everybody, but you've got a couple of guys who I think are tradable assets going into the summer. Talk about a Nick Claxton and a Cameron Johnson in different ways. Nick Claxton, a team like the Lakers certainly are interested. It was reported they were looking at him at the trade deadline. I would not be surprised if they revisit those talks. He's on a declining contract, so I think there is good value there for a team like the Lakers. And I think the Nets could get some decent assets for him because they're not going to look to be good next year, maybe in 2027, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And Cam Johnson was a guy who, honestly, I was surprised was not traded at the deadline. Great catch and shoot player, good size, 6'8", really just a really good 3-point shooter. Now there's a chance they extend him, and it would be good for Cam Johnson's wallet, but maybe not for his winning percentage as a player. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And D'Angelo Russell has a player option. I expect him to opt in. He'll probably spend at least the first half of this year with Brooklyn, and I would be surprised if the Brooklyn Nets end up shipping him off again after his second stop in Brooklyn. Now, you also have Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, and Zaire Williams, who are all restricted free agents. So that's going to be something very interesting to monitor, especially Cam Thomas, who is the most high profile of the three. Day'Ron Sharpe, I think, is a solid backup center, so I wouldn't be surprised if a team gives him a decent offer. But, it's definitely all eyes are going to be on Cam Thomas, what happens with him with the Brooklyn Nets. And lastly, just as a general thought on this roster, now, does this really matter for next season? Probably not, although you may want to start bringing in some guys for when you do want to be good. But they had one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the NBA last season. So that is an area where they definitely need to get better. And we'll talk about some of the free agents who I think they might look to target, and that could help with that area. But it's a fine line because you don't want to get too much better. And their coach, Mr. Fernandez, Jordi Fernandez, I believe, if I'm correct here, he did a really good job. He did a really good job with that team, and so you don't want to give him too much talent too soon because you're going to want to tank and do a little bit better job this season, which I think their roster is set up to do so. Now, let's look at the draft because I think for the Brooklyn Nets, it's going to be the most important aspect of their offseason. It might be the most important draft they've had in several years. It's the first time they're going to have a lottery pick since they've been in Brooklyn, which is remarkable considering how many years they've been bad while in Brooklyn. Having said that, they're going to have 5 picks in the first 36 selections, which is a ton of draft picks. I would not be surprised, and personally, I would definitely look to trade at least one of those picks for assets in the future, whether that's a future first-round pick. Probably, if you're trading one of their later picks, and let's be clear, they've got picks 8, 19, 26, 27, and then 36, which is in the second round, early second round pick, really valuable pick there. Those late first rounders and that second rounder, you can probably get some assets in the future, but not necessarily great ones unless you're really pushing them out. And honestly, if you're Brooklyn, if somebody's going to give you a top 3 protected first in 2030 for your 26th or 27th pick, I would do it. If it's the lottery protected pick, maybe not. But if you can get somebody to give you a lightly protected pick, farther in the future, I think it makes sense. How likely is that? I'm not too sure. but it's something to think about. I think they got to trade at least one of those picks. 5 rookies is a lot, but I do think they could get away with 3 or 4, especially on a team that's not looking to be good next season. Now, I mentioned 2027. Houston still owns a pick swap in that year, so they're going to tank again in 2026, but by 2027 they got to be moving in the right direction. So they've got a window here of next year, and then they got to get better. So who should they draft? Who do I think they'll draft? Who do I think they should draft? Different questions, but I'm going to try to answer both here in the same breath. So at pick 8, I think there's a number of options. A lot of mock drafts have Jeremiah Fears heading to the Nets here. Con Knipple is a popular target. Yegor Demin is also a guy who I've seen. Con Knipple would certainly help a ton with the three-point shooting problems that they've had. Though, it would really help him if D'Angelo Russell's still around. Not having to be the primary playmaker so early in his career, I think would be awesome for him to have Russell. Fears can step in right away and be that playmaker. He's just not going to help with the shooting. And Yegor Demin, kind of in between. I think his shot is better than the percentages at BYU, but he's not as dynamic of a playmaker. Better passer, but not as dynamic of a playmaker as a guy like Jeremiah Fears. So I think those guys are all on the table. At pick 19, I think this is where they go international. Guys like Joan Behringer would be a good replacement for Nick Claxton if he ends up getting moved. And then I look at guys like Nolan Traore, who is fallen. Last year around this time was looked at as like a top 5 pick. Now he's more of a mid-first round pick, but I would definitely look at him here. And a guy who I'd be really excited to take at this spot would be Ben Saraf, who I've seen falling down draft boards. I think his teammate Noah Asenge is going to be drafted before here, but I would really be looking at Ben Saraf, especially if I don't get the playmaker I want at pick 8. I think Saraf could be that guy you give a runway to in 2025-26 season. And then at picks 26 and 27, if I wasn't able to trade pick 19, I got to trade one of these 2 picks. Looking at guys like Thomas Sorber, Maxime Reynaud, Danny Wolf, Cedric Coward. I think Coward and Sorber are the 2 more, and Wolf to an extent, more high upside guys here. Maxime Reynaud, I think, would have tremendous value at this spot, although I think maybe better off going to a contender or a team that's trying to win a little bit sooner. But listen, if you're the Nets, you could draft him here. He can be a part of your core moving forward. I think it'd be a good pick. And then at 36, you're looking for a little bit more upside. So maybe a guy like Hansen Yang, Bogolja Markovic, even a Thero, I think would all make sense here for various reasons. So, moving into the trade aspect of the offseason for the Nets, and look, I'm not going to go into hypothetical trades too much here, but what I will say for the Nets is I think they are an obvious third-team destination for those big trades that have been talked about, like the KD trade from Phoenix. If they need a third team to take on some salary, and the Nets can get a couple of draft picks, go for it. Giannis trade, same thing. If they can get themselves involved there. And lastly, the Celtics. The Celtics are going to have to move most likely either Drew Holiday or Kristaps Porzingis. And so whether that is directly acquiring one of those 2 guys or being that third team in one of those deals, I think that makes a ton of sense for the Nets to get involved there. Lastly, free agency. I think the Nets are positioned to, if they're not able to get some salary, getting some picks, absorbing salary via the trade market, I think they're positioned to make a big swing. Maybe even both. They're going to have a decent amount of cap space, the most in the league for sure. So maybe you make a big swing on a guy like Josh Giddey or Jonathan Kuminga. But to me, I would be looking at Quentin Grimes. I would be looking at Quentin Grimes for sure. If nothing else, it's going to force the Sixers to pay him probably more than they want to. But even if you get stuck with Quentin Grimes, stuck using I wouldn't feel like I was stuck. I'll put it that way. I think Quentin Grimes is a really good player. Showed he can do more the last half of the season with the Sixers. And I think that's a guy who I would overpay for if I were the Nets, because he can come in to this team and play in a bigger role, and then as the team gets better, his role may decrease, or maybe it doesn't. But I think we've seen enough from Quentin Grimes to know he's a guy who I'd be willing to give a big offer sheet as a restricted free agent. And lastly, Naz Reid. If I'm the Brooklyn Nets, I'm making Naz Reid think about where he wants to play next season. I'm giving him a big contract because he's an extremely talented offensive player. The defense as a starter, okay, it may be exposed a little bit, but you're the Nets. You're not trying to win. So I think, getting a guy the talent level of a Naz Reid makes a ton of sense. And then lastly here, a little bit under the radar, free agent wise, guys who are, I think, younger players, although Naz Reid and Quentin Grimes and Gideon Kuminga are also younger players. But I think are going to come in at a lower price point. You may have to pay a little bit of a premium as the Nets, but nowhere near the level of those other four guys. Looking at guys like Trey Jones and Jake LaRavia, who I think have upside, who haven't had necessarily the biggest of roles. You can get them into bigger roles, especially LaRavia, and see what you get. And maybe they develop into trade pieces, or they're young enough to be part of the future for the Nets moving forward. So I'm curious, how do you guys see the Nets offseason unfolding? Who do you guys think they're going to look to get? Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, peace.